All right, today we have Dr. Scott Lyons. Welcome to the show. You are a dear friend of mine, and you also just published your new book, Addicted to Drama. How does it feel?
It feels so good. I imagine it's like giving birth, but a little less painful.
I'd say just a little. Yeah.
A little less. I mean,
I mean,
there's
to be
its own
fair.
drama in the publishing world, but yeah, just a little less. No, it feels so good. It's been, my research for over almost 10 years now. So to finally get all the research collated and written and into this form feels incredible. And thank you for your support along the way of like every time I called you to cry, coaching me through it.
Yeah, I had to go through a little tunnel as well. So I don't think people realize how inspirational the journey of writing a book can be and how painful it can be. It really does change you. It's transformative in some ways. So I'm glad that you got through it and that you're on the other side and that we have this beautiful book. So you're a holistic psychologist, you're an educator, an author, you are a renowned body-based trauma expert and a doctor of osteopathy and many other things. When I was looking at your bio to put some of your background into one of the programs that you're featured in, I was like, wow, does this guy ever stop learning? You have so much knowledge and wisdom. And so I'm excited about this book because I know that it's actually really well researched, really well thought out, and that you really do know your stuff. So what inspired you to actually write about drama first? Because I'm sure you could have written about many different things.
Yeah, I mean, truly my own history with it. Come from a long lineage of chaos and crisis, and growing up both in environment and watching it, drama being modeled as a means of survival as a kid, and learning the behaviors of and adapting them in my own life, and finding that no matter where I was going, that there was always some level of suffering, some level of negativity. And I got to a point where I couldn't tolerate the struggle anymore, the suffering that I was participating in, that I was contributing to. And realizing all of that started this whole life shift of making choices about moving towards well-being as opposed to pain. And which is a wild thing to think about, that we would use drama as a means of survival, and even though it is causing its own pain. And so, yeah, I decided when I was doing my doctoral program, like that's going to be my main focus, my research. And I realized there was nothing out there. There was no resources. There was a lot of like shameful articles out there about like, if you're a drama queen, you're just seeking attention. And I was like, no, there's something in me that's really deeply wounded. And attention is not something I can actually tolerate. Validation was not something I even knew. Like I would go to after, as an artist, and I would go perform and I would say, oh, I did such a terrible job. And someone would be like, you did beautifully. And I could never actually take it in. So I knew there was a dissonance between the idea that drama addiction was just some attention seeking behavior, and it's actually something much deeper, a way of escaping our own trauma by chasing the drama.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really well said because a lot of people do see the drama queen archetype and they do just sort of label it as an attention seeking behavior when in reality we learned that somewhere. And so what I'm hearing is that you put this through a compassionate lens because I think most people don't want to say, "Oh yeah, I'm addicted to drama." Most people aren't going
Oh,
to be able to identify that, especially if we're really in it, because that's the thing about drama is you're sort of swept away with it. It feels so real. How would you define drama if you were to put it into a few sentences?
yeah. I mean, drama is the unnecessary turmoil and the exaggeration and the intensification of experience emotions that brings us further into that turmoil. And our addiction is an attachment, a dependency on something. So, meaning that it serves some purpose. We don't always think about that when we talk about addiction, but it serves a purpose. It fills a void. it distracts us from an even bigger, more significant wound and pain, and it gives us sensation. So what happens in trauma is that we numb off, we wall off as a means of protection, we disassociate, and we become numb, like as though we're a walking ghost in the world. And that was my experience as a child. I used to say to my mom, like, I'm a ghost, and the best they could do is put me in therapy. But there wasn't somatic therapy back then to go, like, what is that numbness?
Yeah.
They just tried to medicate me.
Right.
And they tried to medicate me on ADHD medication and all these other things of like why I couldn't focus, but I couldn't be present in my own body because the pain was too significant. My little beingness couldn't hold and be present with the significant transgenerational trauma, the significant developmental trauma that I endured.
Yeah.
And so, again, going back to the numbness, the addiction, the attachment, the dependency on sensationalism brought me to a level above the threshold of numbness where I could momentarily during my day, my week, feel like I existed, like I was alive. And we see that, like, even those of us who have experienced depression, or sadness for a prolonged period of time, we know what that's like to feel capped, held down from feeling alive. And the need and desire is such a strong thing to feel like we matter, like we belong, we exist. And if we don't feel that, we feel absolutely lost and out of sync with the world. And it's wild that the sensation of drama can momentarily relieve us of that sense that we don't exist, that we don't matter, that we're not important.
And how does that show up? I mean, when I think about it, when I think about friendships, especially, or family relationships, when you think about a person who's addicted to drama, part of what they're doing is they're really trying to rope you into their story and into their reality. And there's like
Yeah,
a lot of, like you said, exaggeration and pitting, me against this person and making you choose.
gossiping, slamming doors,
Yeah,
jealousy, fights, where we see it as like even where red flags become the thing of comfort
right.
in relationships, or they're chasing something unachievable so they can confirm their own sense of pain that they've held. And meanwhile it creates all this chaos. And I think you named something so mysteriously important, which is they rope you in.
Yeah,
They pull you into their tornado of crisis and chaos. And they do it through like drama bonding.
right.
Whether it's like, hey, like, we both have had this suffering, I'm going to bring you in. And what drama bonding is we're throwing logs on each other's fire,
Yeah,
throwing logs on our stress responses. We're not helping each other metabolize and heal, we're amping each other up. And the other way is like, I'm pulling you in, I'm involving you, because when you're in that state of crisis and chaos with me, I feel a sense of belonging, or a
right.
false sense of belonging, but it's a belonging nonetheless that keeps me going, well, I should do that again. My dopamine is like, yes, I should be rewarded. I'm motivated to continue to feel some level of connection, because otherwise I just feel numb and cut off.
And so do you find that people who are addicted to drama have this unspoken contract with others that they will collude with their story? And so if they don't, then they're just out. Like there's
They're
like,
out. Yeah. But on the other side of that is people enabling those stories. It's like your friend calls you and they're like, oh my gosh, this math teacher, he was such, like so mean and he didn't see me. And you're like, what an ass. Like, how awful is that math teacher? Like, why does he even have a job? We're just like, again, throwing logs on, as opposed to going, wow, that sounds really painful. I'm sorry that's happening to you right now.
yeah.
Is there anything else I can hold space for you around?
Yeah, see,
Like,
that's the difference. It's like
That's a difference
you're
between
so responding with
enabling.
empathy. You're not calling them out, but you're not
Mhm.
throwing gas on the fire. And that's
Exactly.
chin.
Because when you throw gas on their fire, you're also throwing gas on your fire. So
Yeah,
we don't often think that the enablers are, even though they mean well, are actually have their own kind of addiction to drama. Just because they're not the main starters of the fire doesn't mean they're not participating in the ritual of it.
for sure. Yeah, I've been in a friendship like that before too.
Yeah.
I see
Yeah.
myself in that. I think most of us have had some sort of encounter with a drama addict or been a drama addict ourselves. It's not that uncommon.
Mm.
Um, and I'm curious what you would suggest if a person is in that kind of dynamic. How could they tell that maybe it's out of balance? Because there's a lot of people who say, well, I need to be able to just vent.
Yeah.
Like, where can I go to vent? And that's a fair question because sometimes we just need to say all the shit that's in our heads and get it out and not have anybody judge us, no matter how
Yeah.
crazy or shadowy it sounds. But where's the
Yeah.
line?
Yeah. It's are we repeating it is a big like symptom of like I call Yushe and I'm like, oh my gosh, that math teacher, da 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 da. I then call my sister and I'm like, his math teacher. And then I was like, and then I'm thinking about my English teacher and I'm bringing them in and I'm rolling down the hill and I'm involving and venting to as many people as possible. I am feeding off the emotion to maintain the stress response as opposed to utilizing these connections to process and metabolize it.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is a big difference. Like, why do we need to vent? What is it that we're not actually, what is the vent? How might the venting be overriding the intimate and vulnerable connection to the emotions and needs that are underlying it?
Right. Because when someone calls to vent,
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
they're venting from a space of anger. But I've even done this, where I call, one of my friends, Georgiana, she works with me and she's a
Yeah.
great listener. And we kind of have this agreement because we're both the kind of people who never ask for help that we will ask each other. I'm like, I don't need to talk about this, but I will. I'm going to call you because it's a good practice.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
sometimes for myself, I find it's more accessible to contact my anger before my sadness. So I'm the kind of
Absolutely.
type because of my upbringing where my anger comes first and then the vulnerability comes next. So I need to be able to sort of get the anger rolling, get it out
Yeah.
and then contact that pain.
Yeah. And that's what's called using a secondary emotion to tap into a primary. So if our primary emotions are not are those are our core emotional experiences. But if they were like cut off or not allowed, or we didn't have permission to feel anger or sadness or even joy as a kid, they all get deposited into a secondary emotion. If we can channel the secondary into a primary, like I need to tap anger before I can really touch into my sadness until I learn and give myself the permission to be with sadness.
Mhm.
Cool. That's a healing path. If I'm constantly defaulting to a secondary emotion and never get to a primary emotion, then we're staying in the loop of never processing and metabolizing the actual core feeling, the actual core need. And then we're complaining that we're not being seen, that our needs aren't being met. And that just keeps fueling the addiction drama.
And that's sort of the hallmark of somebody with anxious attachment too,
Sure.
or disorganized attachment as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly there's a deep developmental attachment piece embedded in the sort of foundations of what creates an addiction to drama. And, when the desire to be seen and it is so fundamental, the desire to be witnessed, the desire to be held, these primal needs are so important. And when we have early developmental trauma or environmental or chaos in the household and it's not safe to actually receive those, we cut ourselves off, we numb around them, and then we're in this cycle of wanting something but not actually being able to receive it, which is very much reflected in an attachment stance where it's like I want love, but why do I keep shutting the door? or I want love, and why do I keep actually chasing people for it who can't meet me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I talk about this a lot too in my own attachment work, which is
Mm.
especially with anxious attachment, we have all of these long lists of what we want and these demands and these expectations. But if you actually ask a person, what would that look like in real life? How could I actually meet that need for you? You might not be able to get an answer. And so that to me is also an addiction to drama. It's that addiction to that cycle of never being met, there always being something wrong, people not understanding us. And yet, what we don't realize is that we're just cycling through this story over and over again. We don't actually have a clear directive or a clear path for people because we're not really in tune with ourselves. And you have somatic practices in this book. Like I'm looking at the end of this book, or at least the later part of it, and there's a lot of meditations and practices to help people get back into their bodies so that they can start to do that work.
Yeah. Yeah. We this is such a primal experience. We can't talk our way out of an addiction to drama,
Mm.
because most often we can't even recognize it. We will find the facts to confirm and justify our extreme and intense behavior that's truly protecting us or helping us avoid the underlying experience.
Yeah.
So we can't cognitively do this. And the stress reflex to keep revving oneself up, chronically avoiding stillness, settled relaxation, um, is such on a subtle body level that we have to be able to start to attune to that. Like, it's easy if, like, you're in the bathtub or you're in a meditation class, and suddenly you realize, or you catch yourself thinking about a fight you had the day before, or imagining a scenario with a friend or a lover that's hasn't even happened yet,
Mhm.
or just thinking about your grocery list, all these ways of avoiding going down and in. And those are a little bit easier, but we might not recognize all the other ways we're revving ourselves up, like a bind. Oh, I really need to hire, like, my house is such a mess and I really need to hire someone to help me. But if I hire someone, then I'm lazy. And if I don't hire someone, it will just get worse. And you can hear the anxious bind. And that keeps me from ever settling. And simultaneously, it's energy building towards that volcanic eruption that we know is more of like the tall tale sign of an addiction and drama.
Right. And so
Yeah.
when I'm looking at the end of your book here,
Yeah.
not end, but I think I'm on page 226, and we're talking about connecting feelings and needs. I
Yeah.
can imagine that that would help with exactly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
because we're starting to learn how to navigate some of those stories that the mind produces when we don't understand the sensations and feelings we're having, and to get clear on what do we actually need in order to move through this. So
Yeah.
we talk a little bit about the feelings and needs
Yeah.
process, because here you
Yeah.
have a fill in the blank practice. So it says, this is
Yeah.
a fill in the blank practice intended to bring more awareness to your feelings and needs. So when blank happened, I felt, feel blank. And you talk about how it can be more than one feeling. And then it reminds me of blank, a memory and recognition of associated experiences and what I need is. And
Yeah.
so walk us through that a
It's
little
such a
bit.
yeah, it's such a easy script, except that it's so hard for us to be able to actually attune to that. So when you called me at 7 this morning, which you didn't, but I wish you did. When you called me at 7 this morning, um, and I had left my phone on, I felt really disturbed. I felt really violated. And it reminds me of a time as a kid where my parents would barge into my room without knocking.
Mm.
And what I need right now is an agreement with you about when we call each other.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
what I also need right now is just to be seen in that sort of early wound that's attaching itself to this morning.
right.
Yeah. And I feel, and I'm seen, and there's such a magic a magic in the somatic process of when we are seen. I call that the validation reflex. It's like when we can attune to the core feeling and need, there's something that just goes, ah, thank you, and releases. And I was saying earlier, like those with an addiction to drama can't um, do the vulnerability required to take in to get that validation reflex for themselves or from other people.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's tricky. So we start to build this validation reflex even in the somatic practice of going that whatever is here, I can be with it and someone else can actually hold space for it.
Yeah.
Because probably often in our, past, there wasn't the time, the space, the permission for our feeling or the co-regulation for us to process through things. And so we never learn that for ourselves.
Define co-regulation just for those who are new to somatic work.
Sure. So co-regulation, it's a term. So when we're born into this world, we're not born with our full capacities, our facility to process and metabolize our emotions, to move through things. And that's what a caregiver does, is through their anchored clarity and presence, they hold the container that says, this is what it's like to be here, to be present with, while the baby, processes through things. And then we learn from that self-regulation. Oh, I know what it's like to hold space for myself, to feel like I can both move through something and not be disjointed or disanchored. And if we're given that opportunity, if a caregiver never it more often than not, so we're talking about like 60-70% of the time, is not able to be present enough to hold space, to literally be present in their own anchored self with the child's experience, they don't learn, it's not modeled how to then do that later for themselves, and they stay in a constant or chronic dysregulated state, which then they learn adaptive strategies that we call attachment strategies in order to cope. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got fight, flight, run away, avoid, numb,
Yeah.
stop, eat, all of the
Ooh,
things. All fun
all the
things
things.
in
Yeah.
moderation.
Yeah. And often when there isn't that present being, that present caregiver, even present community for us, and one of the ways we cope might be to reach out past ourselves, to self-abandon ourselves, to find those resources, to find that love, to find that presence that was never truly there for us. And in that self-abandonment is a void. And that void is what often is the root for um, for for addiction, because addiction fills with whatever it can, fills that void momentarily. It's
When you
like a
talk about
false self that, yeah,
imagining the person who goes after the drama person,
yeah,
the drama queen,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
this is,
yeah,
you're describing the person who has learned to collude, to enable, to caretake in order to survive. And that's just as much of an addiction to drama as the other side of it. It's just that we don't maybe recognize it as such.
yeah, yeah. It's what are the ways that I, again, distract myself, take myself out of the possibility of calmness, settling, quietness that brings me closer to me. It's even like, I don't know if you ever did this, Shay, like you were sad and then you are driving or just listening to music and you put on really even sadder music than what you're experiencing.
Well, that's like my teenage story. Well,
Right?
and I talk about that a lot with people. I'm like, why do we do that to ourselves? It is this addiction. You want to feed that. Music
Yeah.
is such a big one. You can see how addicted you are to drama by what you listen to.
Yeah. Or like I'm feeling a little like, I don't know, disappointed. Like the other day, I was disappointed by a friend's text message. And then I found myself thinking about all the other people in my life who disappoint me. And I was like, whoa, why am I doing this? Why am I throwing logs on my own fire and creating more suffering, more anguish than, first of all, what's necessary, let alone what's healthy.
And you call that a confirmation script. I'm looking at your um, unpacking the origins of a confirmation script, which is, it's all about what you're talking about now, right? We have this
Yeah.
of evidence in our mind, like everybody disappoints me. That's your confirmation script. And
Mm-hmm.
so then you're looking everywhere for that script to be true in all of your
Yeah.
relationships. And
That's
so
right.
then you have a whole section here on unpacking that. And we won't dive into that because that's what people are going to do when they get the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if this
Lots of,
resonated with you, and if you feel that there is something here for you to unpack, then this is the book to go to. Very compassionate, beautifully well thought out, well written book with a lot of really great somatic practices. And for those who don't know, Scott is one of my dear friends, but also a contributor to one of the programs that I run as well, because I just really trust your wisdom. I trust your work and your guidance. And so it's a real pleasure to have had this chat with you today and to support this book in the world. So congratulations. Thanks for
thank
writing
you,
it.
Will. Thank you.
All right, so we'll have the directions for everybody for where to find your book and where to contact you in the show notes. But I'm assuming your book is available online in all
Yeah.
bookstores. Yeah,
Yeah.
get it.
All bookstores. Yeah.
Great. US,
Audio too.
Australia, or is it another language?
Um, there's like 10 languages it's in right now, but I
Right.
don't know when that rolls out. Um, but yeah, there's
And
a language rollout,
you
as
wrote,
you know.
you read the audiobook, right?
I did the audiobook and I had a lot of fun doing it. Yeah. I gotta play a lot of different characters through it, including an impersonation of my Midwestern mom, which was really
Oh my
sweet.
goodness. Can't wait for that. All right. Well, thanks so much. And for those of you listening, be sure to check out Dr. Scott Lyons. What's your website?
uh drscottlyons.com, and Instagram is drscottlyons as well.
Beautiful. And you're also the founder of the Embody Lab. So for those of you
I
who
am.
want to train in somatic work, if you want to learn more about how to work with trauma and all sorts of different somatic practices, then you can check him out at Embody Lab as well. All right. Thank you so much for today, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah.